So, hi everybody. What you don't know that you're watching right now is actually me talking at the end of the thing, and David is going to edit me into the beginning. So, welcome to the beginning. So, we're going to go through this really interesting experience I had where we were photographing the horses of the Camargue in the south of France. And it's something that I had always wanted to do. And when I got back, one of the things that occurred to me is how much I had sort of tucked away in my brain from photographing horses at other times much earlier that really informed the technique and really helped me make the kind of photographs that you're going to see in a little bit. So, for example, this wasn't shot in the south of France. It was done actually south of Jackson a few years ago. And I think Becky is here, and she was with me when I shot that day. Becky, you remember? You still there?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. That was a great day.
It was a great day. And, as I went through these, the things that started to inform my horse picture taking was like really looking at hoof position. And hoof position really made a difference in this picture because there were lots of frames of this particular ski juror, but not until the hoof position was kind of like this did the picture really get made, or something like this where you have a lot of action. Because when the foot position isn't good, the horse looks pretty awkward. And that came in really handy as I was shooting the horses that you're going to see in a little bit. And again, another thing that mattered was the position of the flowing mane or the flowing tail, and the ear position. So in this case, the ear position is swept back, and that doesn't look very good. So you want to try to pick horse pictures where the ears are standing up. Then I was down a few years ago in North. So here's a photograph when I was down shooting horses in North Carolina, and they were walking and trotting through water. And I did a whole series of pictures of these close-ups in water. And it turned out that was really quite helpful because shooting foot position in water actually came in quite handy when we were shooting the white horses on the beach. And so every different type of horse photograph that I had taken in the past turned out to inadvertently help me with what you're going to see coming up. Now, here's a wild horse on Shackleford Banks in North Carolina with a nice long mane. And what makes this picture, I mean, this isn't really a great picture, but what makes this picture anything is how nice and sharp the individual strands of hair are and how it really provides contrast to the blurry background. So, that was another thing that was sort of percolating around in my mind. Another shot from that same shoot where the eyes make a really big difference. Of course, horses have beautiful eyes, but quite often the horse's eye is in some sort of a shadow, and we really have to use post-processing to bring the eye up. And when we do bring the eye up, it adds a lot, particularly when you have the long mane, as this particular horse does. Same with this. This is actually the brother of the horse that you just saw. Same idea with a nice blonde mane, and those wisps of hair, when positioned well, either due to wind or due to whatever you can do, really do make a difference. So all of those different things, I had never even thought about them really before I went on this trip. But as I was shooting, it really occurred to me that I had inadvertently learned some things that were going to come in quite useful. Even shooting a silhouette of our Bronco ended up helping, as you will see when we go through some of these shots. So after all of that, I also had experienced who I think is probably my favorite equine photographer. She's based out of Vermont. Her name is Lisa Cuman. And I had seen this photograph and a couple of others over the years, and they really struck me with the abstract nature of it, but you can still tell it's a horse. And because I'm so fond of horses, I really began to really enjoy her work. And then I was in a gallery, and I don't even remember where it was, but I saw a picture that looked like this. This is one by Kevin Pepper. This isn't the one that I saw that day, but it was very much similar to that. And when I saw this picture, this was the very first time I had seen these horses from the Camargue. I had never really heard of it before. And this was probably 6 or 7 years ago that I saw this picture. And I mean, honestly, for me, it stopped me in my tracks. I don't know if you guys have seen this stuff before. You probably have. And I just think they're magnificent. And I thought to myself, I got to do that someday. And so I had been thinking about it for the last couple of years, and I had been corresponding with a couple of people in the south of France who do these trips. And finally, this past spring, my wife decided that she was going to spend a week in New York with our daughter because our daughter's getting married. And my wife wanted to help her pick out a wedding gown. And I certainly did not want to do that. So I had a week and I thought, maybe this is the time to go to the south of France. So I got in touch with the folks that I had been talking to. And sure enough, there was a trip. So I packed up and off I went. And the area that we were in is down on the bottom. Can you guys see my mouse?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this area down in the south, the airport is Montpellier that you fly into. This is the French Riviera. So there's this big sort of giant harbor. And then we were along the beaches in this area here. And if you take a zoom in on it, this area is called the Camargue. And it's famous for bulls, flamingos, salt. They make a lot of salt out of the sea, and it's famous for horses. And I'm not sure if anyone has ever seen these Camargue bulls. They're quite well known, and people photograph them. And typically, the horses were used to help round up the bulls. So the town that we were in is called Aigues-Mortes. It's right down on the coast in the delta of the Rhone River. It's a walled city, as you can see. This is just outside the city. And so inside each of these gates are these streets that look like this. And it's sort of a tourist town, and it's fairly typical of the south of France. And it's just beautiful. And so that's where we were based out of. And from there, we went out to the horses. So let's tell you a little bit about these horses. So they're born brown, and as they get older, they turn white, and they have been in that area for literally thousands of years. They're quite well known throughout Europe and throughout the equine world. They're sturdy. They're not really big, as you'll be able to see in a little bit. But they're stocky and they're strong, and they've got nice muscular definition to them. And there are still quite a lot of wild, literally wild herds all throughout the area, and they're a protected breed. However, the horses that we're going to be looking at tonight are what they call semi-feral. So although they are actually owned by landowners, there are big farms that frankly are owned by wealthy landowners. And these Camargue white horses live on the land. They don't get pastured. They don't get stabled. They just live out on the land. So in that sense, they're living wild, but they are technically owned by people. So when you want to go photograph them, as you'll see, we have to sort of round them up and get them into a position where they're going to be photographed. But if you drive around the Camargue and you drive down the rural roads, a lot of them are dirt roads, you will see these horses out in the wild. These are just some snapshots that I took as I was driving around my rented car. These were not the horses that we photographed, that you'll see in a few minutes, but these are the ones that are just out there, just sort of living off the land. The Camargue horses that we can photograph are typically owned, as I mentioned, and they're overseen by men and women called gardiens, similar to cowboys in the west of America or the gauchos in Argentina. And the gardiens ride the Camargue horses, and they use them to round up livestock, cattle, herding, bulls, all that sort of thing, just like we're used to out in the West. But this is in the south of France. And the gardiens ride the white horses. It's quite an honorable profession. They've been doing it since, the 1400s. And they wear these cool shirts that I had to go buy one. As you'll see, the gardiens make the whole thing possible. So let me tell you a little bit about the sort of the configuration of this. Many of us have been on photo workshops where you have an instructor / tour leader and they teach you things and they set up things for you. This is sort of like a workshop, although there wasn't much instruction, but there was a lot of logistics. And the first day, I didn't really know what I was getting into. I figured I would be taking pictures like that one you saw Kevin Potter at the beginning of the presentation. But it turns out I wake up at 5:30 in the morning on the first day, and he tells me we're going to the studio. And I said, aren't we photographing horses? He said, yes, and we're going to shoot them in the studio. And I kind of got a little disappointed because I was expecting them to sort of run through the surf or run through the water, but I went with it. And so there is my leader. And lucky for me, I was literally the only person on the workshop. So it was me and this gentleman whose name is Serge Kruglikov. And Serge spent 30 years as a fashion photographer in London and is now retired in the south of France. And he is photographing horses and leading tours. And I asked him which models were more temperamental, the horses or the supermodels he used to work with. And he hemmed and hawed a little bit, and he said it really depends on the day. So here is Serge putting some dirt against the side of the backdrop. And then this is the studio that we're going to be working in. And you'll notice the light hits in irregular places, and that's going to play into some of the photographs that we end up making. So it's time for our first horse to come in, and waiting in the wings here is a white stallion, and there's essentially a trainer who brings our white stallion into the studio. And then what he essentially does is starts running him around. Now I have to tell you, I had never been in this position before. I had never been in a studio with a horse, where I didn't really know what focal length to use. So I'm switching lenses and I'm trying to get my exposure right. And the horse is running around. And I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get a picture that's going to be worthwhile, because I'm shooting stuff like this, and this is not of real interest to me. But then at one point, the horse sort of paused mid-stride and shook his mane like a crazy guy. And I snapped a few frames. And when I was looking at these pictures later that evening, I came back across this one and I thought, well, gee, maybe there's something here. So I started post-processing this image. And one of the things that I really like is I like when things are going from left to right. So the first thing I did was flip this picture around so that he was facing in the other direction. Then I thought I would brighten up the highlights a little bit and see if I could knock that background down. And after playing around for a few minutes, I came up with this. And I thought, oh, that's pretty good. And so that background became really useful. And, now we have these incredible tools in post-processing to select a subject. And honestly, post-processing this image probably took about 2 minutes. And I was pretty happy with what came out. So my first morning of my first day, I at least had one keeper. And so we kept on going. And then about 20 minutes later, the white stallion was led out of the ring, and then they brought in a black stallion. And that created a whole nother set of problems where I had no idea, and I didn't think I had time to set my exposure. And I typically shoot manual, so I was frantically making photographs, checking them on the back, looking at the histogram. What did I have? What did I have? I started shooting at too slow of a shutter speed, and I had about 75 frames that were no good. And so this horse sort of kept running around, and I kept trying to figure out how the hell to get a decent picture of him. And then he sort of paused, and while she was sort of taking care of him, I was able to get my exposure right. And I haven't done much with this picture, but I think that there's a picture right there that I'm going to try to interpolate, enlarge, and maybe I'll get a decent frame out of that one. But once I had the exposure right, I was starting to do a little bit better. And then once the horse was running right toward me, and as I grabbed that frame, when I saw this later, I thought maybe with some brightening of the shadows and knocking that background out, we could make a nice picture out of this, because that brown that was really well lit, I thought would look nice against the black. So after doing a couple of post-processing, I ended up with that.
Michael?
Yep.
Hey, this is Barney.
Hey, Barney.
Wonderful images. Could you make some comments about, photographing dark animals is a task, as you know. So I'm interested in what kind of exposure compensations you used, because you're picking up great detail in the animal.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to this one. So this is what it looked like out of the camera. And what was important to me with these exposures, and you're right, it is difficult, is I needed to have enough detail, and I needed to not lose the opportunity to get detail. And fortunately, the modern sensors are getting pretty good, so that even in these areas that are quite dark, I had not blown the shadows. But I also had to make sure that I didn't blow out the backgrounds, which, having a white background was really a pain in the neck. But if I blew this stuff out, then I would never be able to take it out, because it would be much more difficult to hold these edges in a mask. So what I tried to do was to shoot, typically we try to shoot to the right. I actually was shooting a little bit to the left. And I don't use exposure compensation because I always shoot manual. And that's why for the first, 10 minutes of this session with this black stallion, I was having a hell of a time. And it wasn't until I got to this image that I was able to try to get the exposure right. But by the time this one came around, it was enough so that once I post-processed it, I was able to pick up detail in this area here, which really sort of offsets the contour on either side of the eye socket. And I just thought that this highlight here really made the difference, because without it, it's almost a black and white photograph. And then that sort of drop of color really, I thought helped it a lot. And this this is one of the pictures I really liked. I do have another one that I'm not going to show you because I don't think it'll show up on the projector that well, that is almost entirely black with just some highlights on the muscles, the eyeball, and the mane. And, if anyone wants to see it, I'll be happy to send you a copy of it, but I didn't think it would reproduce well here. I have printed it, and it looks really good in print. So there was the black stallion. So I had another keeper for the afternoon, and I was pretty happy about that. And then we moved to this sort of chestnut colored, and this one was running in and out of the light. And so again, it was an exposure challenge, but I tried to do the best I could. And as I was running around and trying to get some photographs, I started looking back at sort of my contact sheet. And I flagged this one here because this one had a snout right in the right spot coming into the light, and I didn't think it was too blown out. So I took a stab at processing it. And before I show you that one, I didn't really process any of these other ones, because if you look at the foot position, all the foot positions are kind of terrible. Now, I'm not shooting with a 20 frame per second mirrorless camera like some of you. I'm still shooting with a D850, which is 7 frames per second. So I lose some of the opportunity to, like turn this into a good shot because I didn't have enough frame rate. But I took a look at this one and I thought maybe I could do something with this one here. And by working with the highlights and knocking out that background, I think I got something that I was happy with. So that was the chestnut mare in the afternoon. But there was a shot that I really wanted to get. And so I asked the trainer to see if he could position the horse while it was not moving, but I sort of wanted it looking over its shoulder back at me as I was sort of behind the horse. And, horses are a little bit temperamental. So he said, all right, I will try. And so this was generally what I was looking for, but of course his finger was in the way. And we had his crop crossing his ear here. And I said, do you think you can like quickly get the heck out of the way? And he was French and I was English. And so Serge was trying to interpret for both of us. And like for about a split second, I got that. And I said, well, maybe I can work with that. And I went into my post-processing later that evening and I got that. And that was one of my favorite shots of the week. So once we were done in the
we have a question, Michael.
Yeah,
Hang
sure,
on.
go ahead.
Yep. Could you go back to the black stallion photo for a second?
Oh, sure. That one?
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it's off. So I'm just wondering how you feel about like the rule of thirds versus like centering certain subjects in certain situations.
Okay, so her question is, it's a compositional question, and that you put the eye of the animal in the center and didn't follow the rule of thirds, but she thinks it looks great. So what's the, why is her question, I think.
So
why does it work even though it?
So I think that's a really good question. And although the eye is something that really catches you, I think when you spend more than a moment with this picture, I really think the subject is almost the forehead. And I was composing it for the forehead to be the subject. And hopefully, if I got it right, I've got the forehead kind of on the third. And then I've got this highlight also on the third. The fact that the eyeball is sort of in the middle, I mean, I guess almost in the middle. I think it's a little to the left of center. But that to me was sort of incidental because I was really looking at two subjects, this subject and this subject here. So that's how I chose to compose it. I mean, if you look back at the original shot, that's actually the full frame. So this photograph was not cropped at all. I'm probably lucky because my point of focus was probably set for the center of the frame. So I was lucky to get the eye in focus, even though I was composing for the forehead. So, I mean, the whole thing sort of worked out. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers it. Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, great. So let's go back.
Oh, wait, we've got another question. Hang on.
Shoot.
Oh, so there's a question on how did you black out the background?
So if we go back here, so blacking out the background is typically done, and the way I do it is with a combination of masking, radial filters, gradient filters, and brushes. And you kind of have to use all the techniques. So for example, over here, this part of the background, this is pretty easy to remove by using the select object in Lightroom. If you do this and you select this, it's going to hold this piece of hair pretty well, and you can darken this mask pretty easily. This area here, I would first bring in a gradient filter to about here, so that I'm along this line right here, and then knock all this stuff out. And then I would take a brush and I would try to come in using auto mask, and I would try to get the rest of it here. And then I would probably try, I mean, if you look at this here, this is sort of a curve, and I could take a radial filter that was a very big circle, and I could invert it and get a little bit more of it. And then I'd probably need a little bit of brush to get in here and a little brush to get in here. And then the last thing I would do is I would select the subject, and I would get right all around this. And then I would invert the subject and I would knock it out further. And before I go to the next one, if you notice, I'm going to lose some of this here. Ready? So you see, I've lost a lot of that hair because in the masking, I wasn't able to hold it. But whoops, but by using a brush to make it look a little bit more natural, I mean, it looks a little crappy right here, but if you see this image hanging on the wall, this isn't what you're going to be looking at. You're going to be looking at this, you're going to be looking at this, and you're going to be looking at this. So maybe there's a little bit of sleight of hand going on.
All right, one more question, Michael.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And you can select the subject and then you just click the button, and it does an amazingly good job, especially for photograph like this. So I wonder if you use that as one to kind of refine those masks. Sort of like the AI.
Yes, I think the heart of the question is the person asking the question is using the Lightroom mobile, but they're using the AI tools to just select subject and then invert. And if you've tried using those.
I have. They don't really work as well as they're advertised to. You can use them to get part of the way there, but I find if you're really trying to black out a background, using those AI tools don't give you a really good mask. You have to sort of do a lot of it by hand. It doesn't take that long. I mean, it might take you 5 or 10 minutes, but I mean, it's not like taking you hours. But I don't think that the automatic tools work as well as they're advertised. You know, unless you have a really discrete background and you don't have things like, you know, these wispy, out of focus edges. You know, if you have, you know, something with clean edges and a clean background, it works great. But, you know, most of life is not that way. So yeah, some of this is by hand. So where were we? Yeah, so we were here, and then I did the processing, and we got to that. And I was really, really happy with this picture. And this is one of my favorite pictures from the whole week. And this picture is actually sold twice this year so far. And I think this is going to be a good one for a long time. So then we moved to day 2. And again, I got a little confused because, again, I thought we were going to have 10 horses on the beach. And he said, no, we're going to go work with the white stallion from yesterday and the black stallion from yesterday, but we're not going to be in the studio. We're going to be outside. I said, okay, let's see what happens. So first, we had a black stallion. And the trainer, this is the same black stallion that you just saw in those previous photographs, but now he's outside. So now the exposure gets a little bit trickier because you've got bright sunlight, high contrast. You know, you've got black areas, you've got white areas that are going to get blown out. And you've really got to manage your exposure. And again, I'm shooting manual. So fortunately, she was walking him around on the beach for a while I played around with exposure to get what I thought was going to be good. The sky was not too cloudy, so I knew that for 20 minutes at a time, my exposure would be consistent. Now, one of the things that is interesting is she's going to do all sorts of things with this particular stallion, and she's going to take off this big bridle, but she's going to leave on this very thin rope bridle, and she's going to have a rope in her hand. So I'm thinking, what am I going to do about that? So as she gets ready to sort of run him around, she's taken off the big bridle. Now she's got him on a spot on the beach. And what she's essentially going to do right down here at the shoreline, you can see the water, is sort of run him around in a circle. So I thought, okay, where do I need to stand? Where's the light going to be? What do I want my background to be? And you got to sort of think all these things through fairly quickly to then get something. So this is how it begins. She's going to sort of trot him along. That's the shadow of me. So I've got the sun to my back, and the sun is illuminating the front of the horse. And she starts running him around on the beach, and then she starts running him around in the water. And as I'm going through all of these images, this isn't a bad one. I flagged it, but when I looked at it later, I didn't really like it. The shoreline was sort of cutting his neck off. And after we got all these, someone saying something? After I got a whole bunch of these, probably 75 of them, I decided I didn't really like any of them. But then after we left the water, she started running him around. Here's the beach over here. She started running him around up on these dunes. And I kind of liked the grass against the horse, against the beach, against the jetty, against the sky. And so I found this particular image, and I really liked the way the tail, because he was actually on his way down at this point from a high area. So the tail was sort of still up in the air. So I thought maybe we could do something with this. And then I had to sit there with the healing brush and get rid of this lunge line, and then get rid of the shadow of the lunge line. And then, of course, my composition wasn't very good because he's running out of the frame. So I took a crop, I took some healing brushes, and I reframed it. And I did a little bit with the highlights and the shadows and bringing up some of the blacks to make that better. But I still didn't really like it enough. I decided that this would have been much better if it was shot in the late afternoon, where the light was much warmer and maybe the sky was heading towards sunset. So I thought to myself, we can do that. So we warmed it up, added a little bit of a sunset sky, and then I think we have something that was kind of nice. So there was another black stallion shot. Once he was all done, he took a dip, and then he took a roll around in the sand. And after he was done having his fun, which took a little bit of time, I was able to get a portrait on the beach where he still got a nice sandy face going on there. So that was the session in the morning with the black stallion. Then they took him away and brought the white stallion back out. And again, she was running him around in the water, and I kind of liked the look of the white stallion in the water better than the black stallion in the water. And I was happy with the foot position on this shot, and I was happy with the mane. We certainly needed to get the lunge line out and add a little bit of drama to a fairly flat scene of a typical raw file that has no contrast in it. And so as I looked through the other images, that was the one that I chose, this one down here. And by adding a little drama to the sky and putting it in black and white, it really accentuated the white stallion. And we came up with that, and I was pretty happy with how that turned out. Any questions on any of these so far? Not, we will keep going. So then our trainer took the white stallion up into the dunes and practiced a little bit of rearing up. And of course, when you show people the finished product and you don't tell them, like I'm telling you, the story behind the finished product, it's all very impressive. When you see the story behind the product, it's not nearly as impressive, right? So here's a nice one of this white stallion rearing up. And I've now got to do several things. I've got to make sure that this back is not too blown out. I've got to get rid of the lunge line. I've got to get rid of the brand, and I've got to get rid of her. So we change the crop a little bit and do all that. And then we end up there. So when you show that to people, then they go, oh my gosh, isn't that incredible? But little do they know you were cheating. Or at least you had some assistance, right? So that's where we ended up with the white stallion rearing up. And then, of course, he did the same thing the black one did, spent some time rolling around in the sand. This is, remember, the same stallion that had that crazy mane when he was shaking. So he's really got beautiful hair. And that's sort of the same motion he was doing in the studio. It didn't look as good in this shot, but that's kind of the same motion he was doing. And of course, these horses are quite well habituated. They're very comfortable with people. And so we had a nice little moment to say thank you after the fact. Finally, I wake up at 5:30 in the morning on day 3, and Serge says, okay, we're going to the beach. I said, great, that's what I was hoping for. So day 3, we go to the beach, and I was so excited, and I thought that this was going to be like the moment. There are going to be like 11 horses running down the beach. I'll get an incredible shot. We'll be done in a half an hour, and I'll be thrilled. Well, not so fast. So the Guardians come out, and we start the day with 5 horses. So here's the Guardian on one horse. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've got 5 horses for the day, and these 2 Gardiens are going to sort of keep them where they need to be. And so we begin near the beach in this area of tidal overflow where we're going to get some nice reflections, or so I thought, because the position of the horses, that's obviously no good. Then they start walking them toward us. And that's not too bad, but it's kind of boring. And so he starts to sort of move them a little closer together. And I'm not really very happy with that either. So now he moves them over to where I can get some reflection shots. So I try that. and they didn't really like that very much. So then I said, well, maybe I'll get them walking away. And I didn't really like that very much. And now I was starting to get a little bit discouraged because here we were in this, like, my moment, and the moment is nothing. So then I started getting annoyed. So I said, okay, what can I make out of this day? So I found the parallel line between here and the horse, and I thought, okay, I'll take a picture of that. And that didn't really turn me on. He says, okay, we'll start running them. I said, okay. So now we're going to get somewhere. So now we have 5 horses that are starting to get a little active. So that's not too bad. And then, of course, they decide that they want to go play in the sand. So they all get dirty. And now I don't have white horses anymore. Now I have brown horses. So we've got to clean them off and brush them off and start all over again. And we bring them over to the beach after we brush them. And then the guardian starts running them down the beach. And when I'm looking, I'm seeing this and I'm thinking, okay, this is kind of interesting. I obviously have not framed this thing very well because I don't know what I'm quite doing yet because they keep moving around. But this maybe is beginning something. And now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 horses, 3 guardian, and the 5th horse is missing. So they've lost control of the horses. And they're running them toward me, and there's one over here, and this one's behind this one. And, you know, this one particular horse, I want you to remember this particular horse, sort of let this etch in your mind a little bit. And then he says, okay, we're going to run them in the water. And it's the afternoon, and the light is getting good, and we're running them in the water. This one is behind, so that's not a good shot, but we pick up a couple of more. And then I see this shot here, and I think, well, this is pretty good. But there's a big space here, and I wish there were more horses. So we're working the scene a little bit. And how did I get to that? So I want to go back now. I've got 4 nice horses here. I've got a little bit of a busy background. I've got a nice spot in the middle here that I wish these horses were closer to, but maybe I could put another horse in between. So there was a horse you saw a few minutes ago. So I was able to grab him, and I took a couple of other horses from another part of the chute. I flipped them horizontally so that they were a mirror image of each other in a different position. And I put one here, one here, one here. And this horse, this horse, this horse, and this horse are the original horses that you saw in this picture. And we added 3 horses to them. And now we have a 7-horse gallop down the beach that I think looks pretty good. Now, you might say 2 things. One is, oh, you can't do that. Well, in my world, in fine art photography, you can do that as long as you tell people you're doing that. And the other is, how hard is it to do that? And the good news is that it's really not very hard because you've got all this commotion going on down here. So when you're brushing in a horse with a lot of commotion, the commotion really blends itself right in. And if you work really hard, you can find where I've done the work. But when you see this in print, it's pretty hard. Someone have a comment?
I think it was just
So
somebody
I looked
talking.
Okay. I was really happy with this, but I also wanted to see it in monochrome. So I flipped it to monochrome. And this is kind of what I was hoping for when I came to the Camargue. So I was really happy with this picture. It's in the water, it's on the beach, the background's good, the sky's fine. You know, the bright horses are nice and white, and I was really happy with this picture. And then we got a few more photographs. We found the fifth horse, and he got back in gear. And so I shot this one in the late afternoon light. And by cropping out this guy, we just changed the crop, cooled it off just a little bit, and we got a nice photograph there. And I love the foot position here. And then we had this one, and I really like the fact that he's only about 6 feet from me here. And so while they're running at me in most of the other shots, once they get close enough, they start to veer off. So I was shooting with about a 40 millimeter on a 24-70 here. So we're quite close to these horses. And so they've all veered off sort of at the same time. So I like the fact that their heads are pretty much in unison. I like the foot position here. And by giving this a nice crop, if Randy Isaacson was on the phone, he would tell me that this was doomed to be a square, and he would be right. So I'm pretty happy with how that one turned out as well. Now, day 4. So now I've really been having fun, and we've been shooting a lot of horses on the beach. Day 4, we have a new location. It's the lagoon. It's not on the beach. It's a contained body of water. So the water is all going to be smooth, and we're going to have some different kind of backgrounds. And so we'll see what other kind of shots that we're going to get. And today we have 3 female gardienne that are really amazingly talented. And I think I've got 5 or 6 horses. We'll see in the next shot. So this is how we begin. And this body of water is inside of the ocean. So this land goes all the way around. So it's kind of like a pond, I guess. And before we go much further, I should tell you a little bit about what the gear is that we were shooting with. So I use 2 camera bodies. I shoot with Nikon D850. I had a 24-70 on one. I had a 70-200 on the other. I was shooting in manual. I had UV filters on both because at the end of a run, we would get wet. We were standing in the water, so I was wearing waders. I had a couple of small chamois in my back pocket, so every time my camera got drenched, I could quickly dry it off. And remember, we're in salt water, so we need to dry things off very quickly. I didn't want to change lenses or memory cards during the course of the day, so I used 256 gig memory cards, which at this 47 megapixel sensor, I could shoot 1,200 images without changing the card. So between the 2 cameras, I had 2,400 images a day, and that was plenty. In addition to the cameras and the filters and whatnot, I obviously had a raincoat on. I had a sweatshirt on underneath it because it was about 45 to 50 degrees in the morning. And I had a buff around my face and a buff around my head, and I had another buff in my pocket because we were getting destroyed by mosquitoes. I'm not really sure why I didn't get a million mosquito bites in my hands, but I tried to keep everything else pretty covered. We did have bug spray. The bug spray is specially designed for the mosquitoes of the Camargue. I don't know what the special design is, but it worked pretty well. But we did have to be fairly well protected. So once we got going in the lagoon with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 horses controlled by these 3 lovely gardienne, they tried to get 7 horses in an organized fashion, which I can tell you firsthand from watching is not easy. You know, these shots where you've got a lot of overlap, there's nothing very special about these, you know, and they try their best to sort of get them going. And we decided that rather than have them come at us with 7 horses, which would be difficult to get separation, we would try to get them running across us. So we did a couple of passes back and forth in both directions. At one point, the horses got annoyed and they went their own way. The guardian had to reorganize them and start once again to get them to run past us along the water. And then eventually, as the sun started to go down, we started to get some shots that were, I think, pretty good. So we have decent separation of the heads. You know, I would like this snout to be a little bit higher, but you know, you do what you can. If you notice, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The seventh horse is nowhere to be seen. I'm not sure where he or she went. But we did get a few of these. This is a shot that you have the guardian right here. I have not really done much with this. This is a photograph I'm going to work on. I really like this horse looking at me, and I really like the amount of water up here. And so I think if I either pano this or somehow crop it and do some work on it, I think we're going to have a pretty good shot. Of course, I will probably flip it around so that the horse is running left to right instead of right to left. But I'm not done with this one yet. These were our guardians that posed for us by the end of the day. They were really terrific to work with. And then we were done with the lagoon. And then on day 5, we were back to the beach. So this was my last opportunity to get the shot of shots. And so we tried a few things. The first thing we tried is we put the guardian in the water, and we were going to have the horses all get in the water and run toward the shore. The horses were not into this. You know, once they got them in the water, they immediately tried to get out of the water. They ran every which way. We got a couple of shots of them coming at us, but I didn't really like how they turned out. You know, that one's not too bad. That's one that still needs to get worked on, but I think maybe we can get a shot out of that. But generally, even though in concept, having the horses run out of the water is really cool, it didn't really work very well. At least it didn't that particular day. So this is the same beach that we were on the day before yesterday, but now we're there in the afternoon. Oh no, I'm sorry. We were there in the afternoon. Now we're there in the morning. So the light is coming from the other side of the beach. And so the background is the other background. I did not like this background. And while I was photographing these horses running down the beach, I was scheming in my mind as to how I was going to get rid of this background because, oops, I was determined not to use it because I think it looks terrible. However, the surf was good, the horses were good, the light was good. So we started getting horses running down the beach, and that shot had a lot of potential. But I didn't really like this horse's head was too down below, you know, sort of hanging down. So I was shooting at 7 frames per second. So the very next frame had the horse's head up a little bit higher. So I said, okay, I think we can work with this, maybe. And then we got the next frame, which the horse's head was even still a little bit higher. So I said, okay, let's work with this. And because by now you know that if I don't have enough horses, I'm going to add a couple. I didn't think we had enough horses here. So I took a couple of horses from a couple of the other shots, and we did a little bit of manipulation. And once we finally had the frame that we wanted, I love this one's hair. We took these 5 horses, which are these 5 horses right here. And then we added 3 horses over here. So these horses have been added from these 5. And if you notice all this background, and I will tell you that this background was a little bit harder to eliminate than the black background in the studio because there's a lot of crap in it. And it took a little bit of finessing. But this shot, this is the shot that I came for. I was really happy with it. And then I turned it into a poster that I called the White Angels. and this has actually sold quite a few this summer, so I'm really happy with it. And after 5 days, I sort of got the hang of it, and it was a blast. And I got to tell you, I have never had more fun on a photography trip in my whole life. So that's sort of what we did, and some of the pictures that we had. I do have some more pictures if we want to go through a few more, but let's pause and see if there's any questions or discussion or anything anyone wants to bring up.
Or anybody
the
here
way-
in the auditorium? Nope.
By the way,
Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, I'm probably going to go back there in another year. And if anyone is interested in coming with me, just sort of let me know offhand. I got to tell you, you will not have had more fun in your whole life. Anyway, sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. So any questions from the Zoom audience?
Why do you want to go back?
Okay, so did you hear that, Michael? Why do you want to go back?
Because by the end of the week, I was really sort of getting the hang of it. And I think if I go back, I'll be able to make some better pictures. Okay, nothing out in Zoom land. So I've got a few more shots that if you guys want to see a few more, I'll take you through. So, and I'll just give you a couple of comments on this. So this was that same white stallion that we already saw rearing up. But in this case, he was on his way up. So his mane was down flat against his head. I had another shot where he was on his way down and his mane was lifted. And so I actually took the lifted mane and I put it on top of the other mane. Now, horses typically don't have manes on both sides of their head, but this one does. Here's a couple of verticals that were from the lagoon shoot. And once we got the horses sort of in line, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We got all 7 into one shot. And I kind of like these vertical black and whites because the reflections work pretty well. This is another one of the lagoon shot of them coming at me, which I liked. I wish I had a little bit more separation over here, but you know, you get what you can get. And then I tried doing some motion shots. What's that? These are shot at a 30-second pan. And I kind of like the way these came out. There's a few of them here. Here's one that was on the beach. This one was in the lagoon. Back to the beach. This one is down on the beach. And you know, I kind of wish the face was a little bit sharper, but I kind of like how this looks. This was one that was in the studio where the horse was taking a bow. And I didn't really like what the back legs were doing, and I actually shot it horizontal, but I cropped it as a vertical, and I think that came out pretty good. This is, I guess, my imitation of Lisa Cuman. This picture looks great hanging on the wall, nice and sharp and really nice. Here's one of those black stallions that was in the water that I didn't love, but I thought I'd show you how one of them came out. I thought the hoof position in this was pretty decent. I don't really like how wet the tail was. I think that looks kind of bedraggled, but it's not bad. And here is the black stallion with the sun coming up over the dune. People have seemed to get a kick out of that one. I like that one too. This was a couple of young, I told you they're born brown and they turn white. So this is a couple of young mares that were fighting. And then here's the last shot from the lagoon that I wanted to show you. And it appears to me that they're all smiling. So I'm smiling back at them. And thank you so much for joining me and your time and attention. And I'll be happy to take any questions if there are. If not, we're done.
Great. Any more questions? Oh, what was the speed on the pan shots?
1/30th of a second.
Okay. Oh, we got another question.
So I wanted to ask if it goes to phases of having like a perfect favorite subject, or if this kind of had like a favorite over something. Like to shoot, like has he like horses over his career, or has he had like different phases?
Okay. So the question is, have you always liked shooting horses, or is this a phase and you get hung up on one subject and then go to another one later on in a different phase? Is that the question?
No, I don't think it's necessarily a phase. I've always really enjoyed shooting horses. I've never enjoyed shooting horses as much as I enjoyed these. The only other time I've had a really fun experience shooting horses, I was out at Turpin Meadows a couple of years ago in the fall, and they have some great horses out there. And a shot that I had always wanted to try was lying down on the ground, pointing up, and having the horse come down and sort of put its snout near the lens. And so I went to one of the wranglers at Turpin Meadows and I explained this crazy idea. I said, would you help me do that? And she said, sure. So I laid down with half of my body under the fence, and the horse inside the rail, and the wrangler making sure that the horse didn't step on my face. And I got some really cool shots from that shoot. But no, I've always enjoyed photographing horses, but I've never enjoyed it as much as doing it 5 days in a row out in the wild with these guys.
Oh, we have another question here. Hang on.
The Icelandic horses?
Oh. The question is, have you shot the Icelandic horses?
I've ridden the Icelandic horses, but I have not shot the Icelandic horses. No. Has anyone shot the Icelandic horses?
Well, I've been there and taken a lot of pictures of them, but not seriously. They're such